Good evening. In tonight's story, we follow Jake, a Wanderlust soul who takes us along a journey to a soothing lakeside. So, tuck yourself into bed and make yourself comfortable for a good night's sleep. When you're all settled in, close your eyes. If you're like me, you know that summer is all about adventure. It's about stuffing your trunk with 2 weeks' worth of supplies, updating your playlists, and setting off on the open highway. No map, no plan, no rush. Just singing along to your favorite songs and figuring it out as you go. For the past 6 years, my Volkswagen Westfalia has been my gateway car as I traveled across North America. I've parked it between mountain peaks in Yosemite Park, drove through the plains of North Dakota, and taken it up and down the Atlantic coast more than once. The van was originally my dad's before he gave it to me one day. It's old, but it's everything I could ever need from a camper. The pale turquoise body with the VW logo makes it look like I've just driven out of 1969. The walls and ceiling are covered in birch siding, and last year I hung tiny lights along the edges of the bamboo curtains. When I turn them on, the inside of the van reminds me of a cozy cafe I used to love going to in Seattle. And I added a string of Polaroid photos beneath the windows that depict 2 generations of adventure, of my family and myself. I've spent lots of nights reflecting over those and reminiscing on good times and past adventures. Even if I were driving a different vehicle, someone might wonder what decade I escaped from. I pieced together my wardrobe from thrift shops around the continent, and most of my clothes are probably older than I am. Right now, I'm wearing a tie-dye t-shirt that was probably worn to a dozen Coachella festivals, bleached jeans torn at the knees, and red Converse sneakers. I reach for the volume knob on the dashboard and turn up California Dreamin'. It brings back memories of lazy afternoons surfing in Santa Cruz, California 2 summers ago. One of the Polaroids in the back of my van is a shot of the pastel-colored buildings along the beach at sunset. Now, I'm on the opposite end of the continent, in Nova Scotia, Canada, driving along a different ocean. Out of my passenger window, I can see wild beaches as I drive along the Bay of Fundy. The tide is so far out that I can't see any sign of water, even on the horizon. 2 kids walk together along the mudflats with a bucket in their hands that I imagine is filled with freshly dug clams. Their parents follow behind them, both carrying a bucket of their own. Chloe sticks her head out of the passenger window and stares at the family as we cruise by. Chloe is my 3-year-old French bulldog, and she loves the outdoors just as much as I do. We set off together every summer, and now we're going camping deep in the wilderness. Her confident bark would surely scare away even the hungriest animal. Sometimes it feels like she's leading me around, and I'm just following. She's helped me find no shortage of hidden gems over the years. Secret waterfalls with water the color of sapphires, tucked away deep in the forest. Underground springs that give off the coolest and most refreshing water I've ever tasted. And mountain lookouts with some of the most spectacular views I've ever witnessed. I rub a hand on her white torso. She pulls her head back into the vehicle, panting excitedly. Then she sticks her head out the window again as we drive by a collection of arrowhead-shaped boulders sprouting from the mudflats. Each boulder is tipped with spruce trees. The bottoms of the rocks are worn thin from millions of years of tidal currents. Eventually, they'll all be worn to a fine red sand. After a few more hours of driving, we approach a village. I pull off the highway and into the small town. The main street is called Broadway Avenue, and there is a cafe called Broadway Cafe in big red letters. But it looks nothing like the Big Apple. We pass by a small post office and a local diner, but not much else. The busiest part of town is a flea market outside the local rink selling clothes and secondhand toys. It only takes a couple minutes before we are through the village and driving down an old road that winds into a spruce forest. The van bounces up and down as the road transitions to gravel, and I shut the window to keep the dust from blowing in. Chloe lets out a bark when we approach a gap in the trees. I pull off to the side of the road and look through the clearing. It's an old dirt path that looks like it might have once been a horse trail. Now, low tree branches have almost completely grown over it. There's a faded sign next to the path that says, Moonlit Lake. I scratch Chloe between her ears. A robin flutters across the path, and a crow caws from deep inside the forest. I get my knapsack from the back of the van filled with everything I'll need for at least a couple of nights. My tent, sleeping bag, camera, food, and water, and we set off in the forest. The high sun twinkles through the thick canopy, and tall grass grows waist-high on either side of the path, sometimes tickling the backs of my arms. After a while, the dirt path transitions into a decaying boardwalk that leads over a muddy stream. But after we pass over the water, it disappears. The only sign of a way to Moonlit Lake is the occasional orange marker tied to tree trunks. The scent of moss fills my nostrils, and the air feels cool against my skin. I walk with Chloe at my side for about half an hour before we come to a large clearing the size of a soccer stadium. Here, bright sun rays illuminate the meadow. It looks like a fire might have swept through within the last 20 years. The ground is squishy, carpeted with moss, and all over are blueberry bushes. I kneel next to one and put a berry into my mouth. It has a more intense flavor than the blueberries I usually buy from the grocery store. Everything tastes better out in nature. As I cross the clearing, I keep picking blueberries and I fill my pocket to the brim. I extend my hand to Chloe and I hand her a few tiny fruits, and she happily eats them. We set off again, the ground gently bouncing beneath my feet. As we walk ahead, orange markers tied to the low-lying bushes guide us all the way across. When we've almost reached the far side of the clearing, I spot 3 white-tailed deer near the entrance of the woods. They stop and look at us, their ears flared on either side of their faces. Chloe keeps quiet, as if she knows not to scare them. Eventually, the deer calmly walk back into the forest, barely making any sound except for the occasional branch snapping. As we also re-enter the forest, Chloe takes the lead again. There's no clearly marked path, but she keeps her nose close to the ground and lets out audible sniffs as if she's on a trail. She seems so confident that I can't help but think she already knows where to go. Spruce trees give way to a grove of maples. A single maple leaf floats down from the treetops, and I catch it in my hand. It is so symmetrical and so perfectly shaped that it could be used as a stencil for the Canadian flag. My footsteps are quiet against the forest floor now, covered in a kaleidoscope of maple leaves. I take another deep breath of the crisp forest air. I wish I could bottle the scent and enjoy it any time I want. The maple forest eventually transitions back into spruce trees with long, beard-like strands of moss hanging from their low branches. I stop for a moment and look upward at the treetops reaching toward the pale blue sky. They sway gently in the wind, and as I keep my gaze upward, it feels as if I'm swaying too. I dig into my knapsack, pull out a Polaroid camera, and I raise it to the treetops. The shutter clicks, and the camera whines as the faded photo prints out the bottom. A perfect green circle of needles against the sky. We continue walking as the sun grows stronger through the canopy, and we eventually emerge at the edge of a lake. Must be Moonlit Lake. The surface of the water is almost completely still, beside the occasional ripple from ducks swimming through the reeds and insects skipping across the surface. A black and white loon floating on the lake glances at us before diving beneath the surface of the water. It resurfaces moments later, much further away, with a tiny fish in its beak. In the distance, other loons let out trembling calls before taking flight over the lake and the surrounding forest. I walk onto the beach, the gritty sand crunching beneath my feet. A songbird skims the surface of the water and takes refuge in the chartreuse-colored reeds that grow along the water's edge. Chloe lets out a bark as she runs towards the lily pads growing in the shallow water along the beach. Her bark echoes to the far shore, where I can see deer drinking from the water. When they hear her, they retreat back into the tall grass and disappear in the forest. Chloe jumps in the sparkling water of Moonlit Lake and paddles through the lily pads toward a group of mallards. The ducks let out agitated quacks as she swims toward them excitedly. She may be a small dog, but neither deer nor mallards can stop her from exploring these parts. She's just so happy. Close by, a great blue heron takes flight from the reeds. It flaps its mighty wings, soars in the late afternoon sky, and settles farther down the lake. While Chloe continues playing in the water, I unsling my knapsack from my shoulders. This looks like a good place to settle for the night. In about 15 minutes, my tent is up. I stand back just to look at it. It's quite old, shaped like a teepee, and it still has the faded markings of a peace and love sign painted by my Aunt Layla in her Woodstock days. Her and Uncle Wayne gave it to me a few years ago. For my Wanderlust soul, they said. I sweep out the remnants of my last trip from the vinyl floor, dry leaves and sand, and I unfold my cozy flannel sleeping bag. I lie down on top of it for a moment with my eyes closed. The sun shining through the open doorway warms my face. I take a deep breath and slowly let the air escape from me. It feels like a wave of calmness coming over me. After a few moments, I leave the tent and sit on a boulder on the beach with my feet buried in the cool sand. Chloe jumps in the air as she tries to catch a butterfly flying overhead. I throw a branch in the water and she jumps back in, paws slapping at the water, happy as ever to have something to chase. She grabs the stick with her mouth and brings it to me, sending glistening droplets of water halfway across the beach as she shakes herself off. I throw the branch back into the water, and off she goes again. I spend most of the afternoon lazing on the beach, slipping in and out of sleep. When I finally wake up, Chloe is asleep next to me, and the sun is hovering low over the tree line. I stretch out my arms, take a deep breath, and hold it for a moment. And then I just breathe out, feeling like every muscle in my body is more relaxed. Time seems to stand still here. Slowly, I rise to my feet, and I watch a dragonfly skim across the surface of the water like a tiny helicopter. As I look to the far end of the beach to my right, I see a moose wading up to its knees, dipping its mouth into the water. Chloe doesn't bark, mesmerized at the sight of the gigantic animal. She looks at me as if waiting for me to tell her if we should be scared. I rub her neck and smile reassuringly. Nonchalantly, the moose wanders back into the forest. My eyes wandered to the nearby peninsula that juts out into the lake. Terracotta-colored cliffs lead from the water's edge to a lookout point, and I can see an old tire swing hanging from one of the trees and moving in the gentle breeze. I take a few dog treats out of a container and give them to Chloe, who devours them. I figure she'll be hungry soon, and I'd like to go explore the peninsula. After a few minutes, we leave camp and start walking in that direction. We beat through the waist-high grass, and within moments, we re-enter the forest. We soon come across a stream trickling through the woods toward the lake. The water babbles as it runs over rocks and tree roots. I kneel down and cup my hands into the water. It's so cold, it feels as though it's coming from a glacier, but its taste is like no other. Chloe bends her head next to me and gulps up mouthfuls of water too. We resume our walk through the woods. There are no trails, but the trees are spaced far enough apart that we can pass through easily. The forest is alive with sound. The crackling of branches, the scurrying of tiny animals in the low ferns. A chipmunk runs across my feet before running up the roots of an overturned maple tree. Chloe starts to chase after it, but I call her, and she reluctantly heels with her ears perked. The chipmunk lets out a chirping sound before climbing up higher into the tree. Eventually, we find ourselves on a long abandoned dirt trail that climbs upward toward the lookout. We follow it until we emerge at the top of the peninsula we had seen from the beach below. I stand next to the tire swing and raise my hands to my brows as I stare across Moonlit Lake. I can see for miles in every direction. To the right at the bottom is my campsite on the beach. To my left, way far in the distance, I can see a yellow kayak on the water. Someone paddling toward the shore. I squint, and I can make out RVs parked at a distant campground. Eventually, Chloe and I turn back and start climbing down again. I stop along the way to fill my water bottle with the crystal clear stream. I drink half of the cool water and fill it again. When we reach the beach, I kick off my shoes. The evening sand is cool against my feet. Now that the sun is setting, it's time to build a fire before I'm left in the darkness. Along the beach are pieces of driftwood, perfect to make kindling for an evening fire. I pick up some wood until I have a large bundle in my arms. Chloe helps me by bringing a stick twice as long as she is. I throw the sticks into a pile and I carefully arrange the larger pieces of driftwood into a teepee shape. I dig through my bag for a pack of matches. With a swipe across the box's coarse surface, the end of the match bursts into a tiny flame. With it, I light one of the smaller twigs and a piece of beech bark at the base of the fire. Within moments, the dry wood begins to crackle and the flames grow. I continue to stoke the fire and add larger logs to the blaze until the flames are close to 3 feet tall. The gentle breeze blowing along the beach helps feed the flames, and soon the campsite is filled with a warm glow and the scent of wood smoke. I take out some tinfoil-wrapped potatoes from my bag, and then I place them at the base of the fire amongst the coals. And over these, I lay a small iron grid to which I add some sausages. As my meal is cooking, I look out to Moonlit Lake. Its perfectly still waters reflect the purple twilight sky and the pale moon peeking through wispy clouds. When it shines bright at nighttime, I imagine it will light up the entire lake. The potatoes are now cooked through, and I tear off the foil and open them up. A column of steam trails into the sky as I melt butter onto their white flesh and sprinkle a bit of salt. I also remove the sausages from the fire. I grab a small metal dish and plate my meal. I make one for Chloe, too. Slowly, we savor our supper to the sound of crickets and the rustling of leaves coming from the forest. Once I finish eating, the sun has fallen completely behind the horizon, and the moon has risen higher in the indigo sky. I pull out a bag of marshmallows. I put one at the end of a stick, and I roast it over the fire until it becomes golden brown. As I carefully bite into it, I gaze upon the now twinkling stars. I take another marshmallow and repeat the ritual. The scent and sound of the crackling fire, the taste of sweet and gooey marshmallow, and Chloe resting beside me. It doesn't get better than this. Once I finish eating, I continue sitting by the fire until I can hardly keep my eyes open. Moonlight now illuminates the entire lake, and I can see where it got its name from. And the sky is filled with countless stars that seem to fall into the water. It's a magical sight. Groggy, I reach for my toothbrush and toothpaste. I brush my teeth, rinse my mouth, and put out the fire with a bucket of water before retreating back into my tent with Chloe. I snuggle into my cozy flannel sleeping bag and rest my head on my pillow. I breathe in the crisp night air. This has been the most soothing adventure yet. Through the doorway, I can still see stars reflecting on the surface of Moonlit Lake. I trace familiar constellations with my fingers as Chloe curls up at my feet. Orion, Scorpius, Ursa Major. The last image I can remember before falling into a deep and restful sleep is a shooting star streaking across the skyline. I close my eyes and listen to the last calls of the loons far off in the distance as I drift away. Well, I hope you enjoyed Jake's adventure. On this note, Good night, and sweet dreams.